Chapter 20. Indian summer came and went. Brazen color came into the trees, rioted briefly, and then faded. After one cold, driving rain in mid-October, the leaves started to fall. Ellie began to arrive home laden with Halloween decorations she had made at school and entertained Gage with the story of the Headless Horseman. Gage spent that evening babbling happily about somebody named 𝘕𝘗𝘕𝘕. Rachel got giggling and couldn't stop. It was a good time for them that early autumn. Lewis's work at the university had settled into a demanding but pleasant routine. He saw patients, he attended meetings of the Council of Colleges, he wrote the obligatory letters to the student newspaper, advising the university's co-ed population of the confidentiality of the infirmary's treatment for VD and exhorting the student population to get flu boosters, as the A type was amped to be prevalent again that winter. He sat on panels. He chaired panels. During the second week in October, he went to the New England Conference on College and University Medicine in Providence and presented a paper on the legal ramifications of student treatment. Victor Pascal was mentioned in his paper under the fictitious name of Henry Montes. The paper was received well. He began working up the infirmary budget for the next academic year. His evenings fell into a routine: kids after supper, a beer or two with Judd Crandall later. Sometimes Rachel came over with him if Missy was available to sit for an hour, and sometimes Norma joined them, but mostly it was just Lewis and Judd. Lewis found the old man as comfortable as an old slipper, and he would talk about Ludlow history going back 300 years, almost as though he had lived all of it. He talked, but never rambled. He never bored Lewis, although he had seen Rachel yawning under her hand on more than one occasion. He would cross the road to his house again before 10 on most evenings, and, like as not, he and Rachel would make love. Never since the first year of their marriage had they made love so often, and never so successively and pleasurably. Rachel said she believed it was something in the artisan well water. Lewis opted for the Maine air. The nasty death of Victor Pascal on the first day of the fall semester began to fade in the memory of the student body and in Lewis's own. Pascal's family, no doubt, still grieved. Lewis had spoken to the tearful, mercifully faceless voice of Pascal's father on the telephone. The father had only wanted assurance that Lewis had done everything he could, and Lewis had assured him that everyone involved had. He did not tell him of the confusion, the spreading stain on the carpet, and how his son had been dead almost for the instant he was brought in, although these were things that Lewis thought he himself would never forget. But for those to whom Pascal was only a casualty, he had already dimmed. Lewis still remembered the dream and the sleepwalking incident that had accompanied it, but it now seemed almost as if it had happened to someone else, or on a television show he had once watched. His one visit to a whore in Chicago 6 years ago seemed like that now. They were both equally unimportant, side trips which held a false resonance, like sounds produced in an echo chamber. He did not think at all about the dying Pascal had or had not said. There was a hard frost on the Halloween night. Louis and Ellie began at the Crendels'. Ellie cackled satisfyingly, pretended to ride her broom around Norma's kitchen, and was duly pronounced just the cutest thing I ever saw. Isn't she, Judd? Judd agreed that she was and lit a cigarette. "Where's Gage, Louis? Thought you'd had him dressed up too." They had indeed planned on taking Gage around. Rachel, in a particular mood, had been looking forward to it because she and Missy Dandridge had whopped together a sort of bug costume with twisted coat hangers wrapped in a crepe paper for fillers. But Gage had come down with a troublesome bronchial cold, and after listening to his lungs, which sounded a bit rattly, and consulting the thermometer outside the window, which read only 40 degrees at 6 o'clock, Louis had nixed it. Rachel, although disappointed, had agreed. Ellie had promised to give Gage some of her candy, but the exaggerated quality of her sorrow made Louis wonder if she wasn't just a bit glad that Gage wouldn't be along to slow her down, or steal part of the limelight. "Poor Gage," she said in tones usually reserved for those suffering terminal illness. Gage, unaware of what he was missing, sat on the sofa watching Zoom with Church snoozing beside him. "Anyway," Gage had replied without a great deal of interest, and went back to the TV. "Poor Gage," Ellie had said again, fetching another sigh. Louis thought of crocodile tears and grinned. Ellie grabbed his hand and started pulling him. "Let's go, Daddy. Let's go, let's go, let's go." The things I do for you people. Gage has got a touch of the crop, Louis said to Judd now. "Well, that's a real shame," Norma said. "But it will mean more to him next year. Hold out your bag, Ellie. Whoops!" She had taken an apple and a bite-sized Snickers bar out of the treat bowl on the table, but both of them had fallen out of her hand. Louis was a little shocked at how claw-like that hand looked. He bent over and picked up the apple as it rolled across the floor. Judd got the Snickers and dropped it into Ellie's bag. "Oh, let me get you another apple, honey," Norma said. "That one will bruise." "It's fine," Louis said, trying to drop it into Ellie's bag, but Ellie stepped away, holding her bag protectively shut. "I don't want a bruised apple, Daddy," she said, looking at her father as if he might have gone mad. Brown spots. Yuck.
Ellie, that's damned impolite.
Don't scold her for telling the truth, Louis, Norma said. Only children tell the whole truth, you know. That's what makes them children. The brown spots are yucky. Thank you, Mrs. Crandall, Ellie said, casting a vindictive eye on her father. You're very welcome, honey, Norma said. Judd escorted them out to the porch. Two little ghosts were coming up the walk, and Ellie recognized them both as friends from school. She took them back to the kitchen, and for a moment, Judd and Louis were alone on the porch.
Her arthritis has gotten worse,
Louis said. Judd nodded and pinched out his cigarette over an ashtray.
Yeah, it's come down harder on her every fall and winter, but this is the worst it's ever been.
What does her doctor say?
Nothing. He can't say anything because Norma hasn't been back to see him.
What? Why not? Judd looked at Louis, and in the light cast by the headlamps of the station wagon waiting for the ghosts, he looked oddly defenseless.
I'd meant to ask you this at a better time, Louis, but I guess there isn't no good time to impose on a friendship. Would you examine her?
From the kitchen, Louis could hear the two ghosts booing and Ellie going into her cackles, which she had been practicing all week again. It all sounded very fine and Halloweenish.
What else is wrong with Norma? He asked. Isn't she afraid of something else, Judd? She's been having pains in her chest,
Judd said in a low voice.
She won't go see Dr. 𝘈𝘗𝘕 anymore. I'm a little worried. Is Norma worried?
Judd hesitated and then said,
I think she's scared. I think that's why she doesn't want to go to the doctor. One of her oldest friends, Betty Koslow, died in the EMMC just last month. Cancer. She and Norma were of an age. She's scared.
I'd be happy to examine her, Louis said.
No problem at all. Thanks, Louis,
Judd said gratefully.
If we catch her one night, gang up on her, I think.
Judd broke off, head cocking quizzically to one side. His eyes met Louis's. Louis couldn't remember later exactly how one emotion slipped into the next. Trying to analyze it only made him feel dizzy. All he could remember for sure was that curiosity changed swiftly into a feeling that somewhere something had gone badly wrong. His eyes met Judd's, both unguarded. It was a moment before he could find a way to act. Hoo! Hoo! The Halloween ghosts in the kitchen chanted. Hoo! Hoo! And then suddenly, the H sound was gone, and the cry rose louder, genuinely frightening. Ooh! And then one of the ghosts began to scream. "Daddy!" Ellie's voice was wild and tight with alarm. "Daddy! Mrs. Crandall fell down!"
Oh, Jesus.
Judd almost moaned. Ellie came running out onto the porch, her black dress flapping. She clutched her broom in one hand. Her green face, now pulled along in dismay, looked like the face of a 𝘈𝘠𝘕𝘠 in the last stages of alcohol poisoning. The two little ghosts followed her, crying. Judd lunged through the door, amazingly spry for a man of over 80. No, more than spry. Again, almost lithe. He was calling his wife's name. Lewis bent and put his hands on Ellie's shoulders. "Stay right here on the porch, Ellie. Understand?" "Daddy, I'm scared," she whispered. The two ghosts barreled past them and ran down the walk, candy bags rattling, screaming their mother's name. Lewis ran down the front hall and into the kitchen, ignoring Ellie, who was calling for him to come back. Norma lay on the hilly linoleum by the table in a litter of apples and small Snicker bars. Apparently, she had caught the bowl with her hand going down and had overturned it. It lay nearby like a small Pyrex flying saucer. Judd was chafing one of her wrists, and he looked up at Lewis with a strained face.
"Help me, Lewis," he said. "Help Norma. She's dying, I think." "Move to one side,"
Lewis said. He kneeled down and came down on a spy, crushing it. He felt juice bleed through the knee of his old cords, and the cidery smell of apple suddenly filled the kitchen. Here it is, Pascal all over again. Lewis thought, and then shoved the thought out of his mind so fast that it might have been on wheels. He felt for her pulse and got something that was weak, thready, and rapid. Not really a beat, but only simple spasms. Extreme 𝘈𝘳𝘓𝘕𝑚𝑎, well on the way to full cardiac arrest. You and Elvis Presley, Norma, he thought. He opened her dress, exposing a creamy yellow silk slip. Moving with his own rhythm now, he turned her head to one side and began administering CPR. "Judd, listen to me," he said. Heel of the left hand, 1/3 of the way up the breastbone, 4 centimeters above the xiphoid process. Right hand gripping the left wrist, bracing, letting pressure. Keep it firm, but let's take it easy on the old ribs. No need to panic yet. And for Christ's sake, don't collapse the old lungs.
"I'm here,"
Judd said.
"Take Ellie," he said. "Go across the street. Carefully. Don't get hit by a car. Tell Rachel what's happened. Tell her I want my bag. Not the one in the study,
but the one on the high shelf in the upstairs bedroom. She'll know the one. Tell her to call 𝘈𝘂𝘕𝘄 and send an ambulance.
Bucksport's closer,
Judd said. Bangor's faster. Go. Don't you call. Let Rachel do that. I need that bag. And once she knows the situation here, Lewis thought, I don't think she'll bring it over. Judd went. Lewis heard the screen door bang. All right. You're okay, puppy. Don't worry. Sorry. Puppy got a little bit dramatic. There we go. There. You can be more comfortable now. Judd went. Lewis heard the screen door bang. He was alone with Norma Crandall in the smell of apples. From the living room came the steady tick of the 7-day clock. Norma suddenly uttered a long, snoring breath. Her eyelids fluttered, and Lewis was suddenly doused with a cold, horrid certainty. She's going to open her eyes. Oh Christ, she's going to open her eyes and start talking about the pet cemetery. But she only looked at Lewis with a muddled sort of recognition, and then her eyes closed again. Lewis was ashamed of himself and the stupid fear that was so unlike him. At the same time, he felt hope and relief. There had been some pain in her eyes, but not agony. His first guess was that this had not been a grave seizure. Lewis was breathing hard now and sweating. No one but TV paramedics could make CPR look easy. A good, steady, closed chest massage popped a lot of calories, and the webbing between his arms and shoulders would ache tomorrow. Can I do anything? He looked around. A woman dressed in slacks and a brown sweater stood hesitantly in the doorway, one hand clutched into a fist between her breasts. The mother of the ghosts, Lewis thought. No, he said, and then, yes. Wet a cloth, please. Wring it out. Put it on her forehead. She moved to do it. Lewis looked down. Norma's eyes were opening again. Lewis, I fell down, she whispered. Think I fainted. You've had some sort of coronary event, Lewis said. Doesn't look too serious. Now relax and don't talk, Norma. He rested for a moment, then took her pulse again. The beat was too fast. She was Morse coding. Her heart could beat regularly, then run briefly in a series of beats. That was almost, but not quite, fibrillation. And then begin to beat regularly again. Beat, beat, beat. Whack, whack, whack. Beat, 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 beat. It was not good, but it was marginally better than cardiac 𝘈𝘳𝘓𝘃𝑒𝑚𝑎. The woman came over with the cloth and put it on Norma's forehead. She stepped away uncertainly. Judge came back with Louis's bag.
Louis?
She's going to be fine, Louis said, looking at Judd, but actually speaking to Norma.
Med-Q coming? Your wife is calling them,
Judd said.
I didn't stay around.
No. Hospital.
Yes, hospital,
Louis said.
5 days observation, medication, then home with your feet up, Norma, my girl. And if you say anything else, I'll make you eat all these apples, cores and all.
She smiled wanly, then closed her eyes again. Louis opened his bag, rummaged, found the occidental, and shook one of the pills, so tiny it easily would have fit on the moon of one fingernail, into the palm of his hand. He recapped the bottle and pinched the pill between his fingers.
Norma, can you hear me?
Yes.
Want you to open your mouth. You did your trick. Now you get your treat. I'm going to put a pill under your tongue, just a small one. I want you to hold it there until it dissolves. It's going to taste a little bitter, but never mind that, all right?
She opened her mouth. Stale denture breath wafted out, and Louis felt a moment of aching sorrow for her, lying here on her kitchen floor in a litter of apples and Halloween candy. It occurred to him that once she had been 17, her breasts eyed with great interest by the young men of the neighborhood, all her teeth her own, and the heart under her waist shirt, a tough little pony engine. She settled her tongue over the pill and grimaced a little. The pill tasted a little bitter, all right. It always did. But she was no Victor Pascal, beyond help and beyond reach. He thought Norma was going to live to fight another day. Her hand groped in the air, and Judd took it gently. Louis got up then, found the overturned bowl, and began to pick up the treats. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. 𝘠𝘕𝘠𝘦 from down the road, helped him, and then she said she thought she had better go back to the car. Her 2 boys were frightened.
Thank you for your help, Mrs. 𝘠𝘠𝘠𝘠,
Louis said. I didn't do anything, she said flatly. But I'll go down on my knees tonight and thank God you were here, Dr. Creed. Louis waved a hand, embarrassed.
That goes for me too,
Judd said. His eyes found Louis and held them. They were steady. He was in control again. His brief moment of confusion and fear had passed.
I owe you one, Louis.
Get off it, Louis said, and tipped a finger toward Mrs. �々𝘵𝘵𝘠 as she left. She smiled and waved back. Louis found an apple and began to eat it. The spy was so sweet that Louis' taste buds cramped momentarily. But that was not a totally unpleasurable sensation. 1-1 tonight, Lou, he thought, and worked on the apple with relish. He was ravenous.
I do, though,
Judd said.
When you need a favor, Louis, you see me first.
All right, Louis said. I'll do that. The ambulance from Bangor Medco arrived 20 minutes later. As Louis stood outside, watching the orderlies load Norma into the back, he saw Rachel looking out the living room window. He waved to her. She lifted a hand in return. He and Judd stood together and watched the ambulance pull away, lights flashing, siren silent.
Guess I'll go on up to the hospital now,
Judd said. They won't let you see her tonight, Judd. They'll want to run an EKG on her and then put her in intensive care. No visitors for the first 12 hours.
Is she going to be okay, Louis? Really okay?
Louis shrugged. No one can guarantee that. It was a heart attack. For whatever it's worth, I think she's going to be fine. Maybe better than ever once she gets on some medication. Judd said, lighting a Chesterfield. Louis smiled and glanced at his watch. He was amazed to see it was only 10 minutes to 8. It seemed that a great deal more time had gone by. Judd, I want to go get Ellie so she can finish her trick-or-treating.
Yeah, of course you do.
This comes out as course you do.
Tell her to get all the treats she can, Louis.
I will. Ellie was still in her witch costume when Louis got home. Rachel had tried to persuade her into her nightie, but Ellie had resisted, holding out for the possibility that the game, suspended because of the heart attack, might yet be played out. When Louis told her to put her coat back on, Ellie whooped and clapped. It's going to be awfully late for her, Louis. We'll take the car, he said. Come on, Rachel. She's been looking forward to this for a month. Well, she smiled. Ellie saw it and shouted again. She ran for the coat closet. Is Norma all right? I hope so. He felt good. Tired, but good. It was a small one. She's going to have to be careful. But when you're 75, you have to recognize that your pole vaulting days are done anyway. It's lucky you were there. almost God's providence.
I'll settle for luck. He grinned as Louis? Okay, Louis? All right. I'll settle for luck. He grinned as Ellie came back. You ready, Hazel?
I'm ready, she said. Come on, come on, come on. On the way home with half a bag of candy, an hour later, Ellie protested when Lewis finally called a halt, but not too much. She was tired. His daughter startled him by saying, "Did I make Mrs. Crandall have the heart attack, Daddy, when I wouldn't take the apple with the bruise on it?" Lewis looked at her, startled, wondering where children got such funny, half-superstitious ideas. Step on a crack, break your mother's back. Loves me not. Daddy's stomach, Daddy's head. Smile at midnight, Daddy's dead. That might make him think of the pet cemetery again in those crude circles. He wanted to smile at himself and was not quite able.
No, honey,
he said.
When you were in with those two ghosts.
Those weren't ghosts, just the 𝘠𝘕𝘠𝘕𝘠 twins.
Well, when you were with them, Mr. Crandall was telling me that his wife had been having little chest pains. In fact, you might have been responsible for saving her life, or at least for keeping it from getting it worse.
Now it was Ellie's turn to look startled.
Lewis nodded. She needed a doctor, honey. I'm a doctor. But I was only there because it was your night to go out trick-or-treating.
Ellie considered this for a long time, then nodded. But she'll probably die anyway, she said, matter-of-factly. People who have heart attacks usually die. Even if they live, pretty soon they'll have another one, and another one, and another one, until boom!
And where did you learn these words of wisdom, may I ask?
Ellie only shrugged, a very Lewis-like shrug. He was amused to see. She allowed him to carry her along with her bag of candy, an almost ultimate sign of trust, and Lewis pondered her attitude. The thought of Church's death had brought on near hysteria, but the thought of grandmotherly Norma Crandall dying, that Ellie seemed to take calmly, a matter of course, a given. What had she said? Another one and another one until boom. The kitchen was empty, but Lewis could hear Rachel moving around upstairs. He set Ellie's candy down on the counter and said, "It doesn't necessarily work that way, Ellie. Norma's heart attack was a very small one, and I was able to administer the treatment right away. I doubt if her heart was damaged much at all. Why, hello there. Good to see you. Glad that you're stopping by." "Oh, I know," Ellie agreed, almost cheerfully. "But she's old, and she'll die pretty soon anyway. Mr. Crandall, too. Can I have an apple before I go to bed, Daddy?"
No,
he said, looking at her thoughtfully.
go up and brush your teeth, babe. Does anyone really think they understand kids? He wondered.
When the house was settled, and they were in their side-by-side twin beds, Rachel softly asked, "Was it very bad for Ellie Lou? Was she upset?"
No,
he thought.
She knows old people croak at regular intervals, just like she knows to let the grasshopper go when it spits. Like she knows that if you stumble on the number 13 when you're skipping rope, your best friend will die. Like she knows that you put the graves in diminishing circles up in the pet cemetery. Nope,
he said.
She handled herself very well. Let's go to sleep, Rachel, okay?
That night, as they slept in their house, and as Judd lay wakefully in his, there was another hard frost. The wind rose in the early morning, ripping most of the remaining leaves, which were now an uninteresting brown, from the trees. The wind woke Louis, and he stared up and sat on his elbows, mostly asleep and confused. There were steps on the stairs, slow, dragging steps. Pascal had come back. Only now, he thought, 2 months had passed. When the door opened, he would see a rotting horror, the jogging shorts caked with mold, the flesh fallen away in great holes, the brain decayed to paste. Only the eyes would be alive, hellishly bright and alive. Pascal would not speak this time. His vocal cords would be too decayed to produce sounds. But his eyes, they would beckon him to come.
No,
he breathed, and the steps died out. He got up, went to the door, and pulled it open, his lips drawn back in a grimace of fear and resolution, his flesh cringing. Pascal would be there, and with his raised arms, he would look like a long-dead conductor about to call for the first thundering phrase of 𝘈𝘄𝑚. That must be a different language because I don't know what that is. But okay, we move on. No such thing, as Judd might have said. The landing was empty, silent. There was no sound but the wind. Louis went back to bed and slept.